Hey guys, how's it going? This is Ina from Ina C Watercolor, and today I'm going to take you guys through the process of planning for your painting before you apply paint to paper. This is a very important step in the painting process that really helps an artist bring out their vision and be able to execute towards it. But often I don't find a lot of tutorials explaining this process and how to do it, especially do it in a way that is visual and easy to adhere to as you paint. That's why I feel I should address this topic in this video. The reason why this is such an important step in the painting process is because it forces you to think through, what is my focal point? What are the connected shapes that needs to be tackled together? What shapes are disjointed and can be tackled separately? And also, is there any layers or shapes that needs to have soft edges? The benefits of planning for the painting really are twofold. First, you end up having a more cohesive painting with a very clear vision, especially a clear focal point. The second benefit of planning for the painting is also that it will allow you to paint more loosely and expressively. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's true that by having a tight plan, you are freed up to think more about the brushworks. You're building textures and interest with your brushwork, and that is where really the looseness comes from. Let's first talk briefly about the painting subject and what my initial vision was for the painting. So I aimed to paint the St. Mark's Square in Venice at a relatively unusual angle from the side of the Doge's Palace, which is this building on the right, looking towards the St. Mark's Basilica in the background. I still want to capture the St. Mark's Basilica as the main focal point. I will probably crop it out somewhere like here so that the Basilica becomes a bigger interest point. I don't mind this pillar here because it helps breaking up the homogeny of the Doge's Palace building, which is very repetitive. I still want to preserve these very strong lines on the Doge's Palace as a way to invite viewer towards the main focal point. The contrast between these white umbrellas and the shadow on the basilica are really what creates that immediate sharp edges that catches viewers' attention. However, I will probably make it red because that way I can create another visual pathway towards the focal point again. And for this building at the front, I will refer to maybe this photo and include multiple archways. So it's more obvious that this is a building, not just a wall. Figures are helpful in the front, for which I will add some extra figures because you can see figures as added points of interest that has relatively sharper edges. So I'll be balanced off this very blank space on the lower left corner with a few more figures. And I'll probably move some of these pedestrians over to the front so they can cast a bit of shadow, which then can get connected to these architectural elements. I will ignore pretty much all of the large crowds in the background because they don't serve a purpose in my vision for the painting. So then let me take you guys through how I built a plan for this painting. For this scene, I'm thinking the first step is to paint the sky and let it dry out before I go in and apply the light wash for the rest of the buildings, because I do not want the sky color to blend with the architectures. I want to have straight, clean line. That is why I've decided to separate the sky as a different step from the rest of the areas. I will also keep in mind there are some white objects in the scene and some high contrast areas that I will need to leave out as white space. So definitely some of the areas on this pillar, and maybe not try to cover up the entire front building, and perhaps just some white spaces on the bistro area, mainly to add some visual interest. And also because I want the umbrellas to be absolutely vibrant red, I do not want other colors to tone it down. So I've decided to leave out the umbrella space as well. so that immediately after I have applied light wash, I can come in and color the umbrellas. I will also want the tablecloths to be colored in as well. And for some of these tables at the front, I want the red color to bleed just a little bit so that they create a bit of like, soft edges so that your eyes are not like pulled constantly to this front. Well, I really want people to look at this area. So these 3 steps comprises of the light wash of the painting. I will need to let that dry up completely before I come in with a mid-tone wash, which is a large connected shape that brings out kind of the 3-dimensionality of all the objects in the scene. So for the mid-tone wash, it will comprise of cool or warm color because the buildings are actually of different color. Even for the Doge's Palace, it has kind of like a red-pink color on top and the cool gray color at the bottom. But for planning purpose, you don't have to distinct the exact color you're going to use. All you need to do is to keep in mind what that shape will look like. So then when you're executing it, you can just change the color temperature within these large masses. So what I will do is that I will need to kind of depict this high contrast area of the basilica in the background, and then maybe work towards finishing up the large shape of the Doge's Palace, making sure to execute these fine details like these finials on top of the building, and that's what gives it its unique form. Also need to finish up the shadow area of these statues on top of the building. So now the midtone will stop on top of the umbrella, but then it will continue on towards the bottom of the umbrella, which then will also make sure to leave out some negative shapes for these figures sitting in the bistro in the background. This shadow will then also connect to the shaded part of this pillar, more like the base of the pillar. That's in a bit of like a steps. Once we're done with that, we can move on to the front building, which can be tackled as a separate area because the large shape kind of stopped around this side of the building, which is fully lit. Once we're done with that mid-tone wash, then we're gonna go in and adding in the dark wash, which I imagine will be primarily dry brush. I don't know how to do dry brush in Photoshop. That's why you're seeing some soft edges. So for the dark tone, that will apply mainly to the archways and the windows. That will bring out the dimensionality further of the architectural shapes. Now you may wonder, do I have to pull up Photoshop and do this elaborate diagram every time I try to paint? The answer is a resounding no. I'm doing this just so that I could easily explain to you guys what a painting plan entails, but a painting plan can live in all kinds of formats. What you can do is you can literally create some thumbnail sketches and call out which steps each area belongs to, and maybe call out any specific things that is likely forgotten once you get to it, so you can remind yourself. Like over here, I added a step 1.5 just to be sure I don't move on to paint the mid-tone until I'm done with doing this wet and wet area, because that is a time-sensitive task. And another thing you could do is maybe after you have already created the sketch, you can write down literally what you're gonna do step by step. And maybe just call out specific things that is not so obvious so that once you get to it, you don't forget. Or you can just look at the sketch and talk out loud what you're gonna do. But as long as you know how it's gonna go down from beginning to end, you do have a plan. We can go ahead and get the painting started. Step number 1, paint the sky area. I will keep the sky very simple, just using primarily ultramarine blue and add in a little bit of burnt sienna. And in this case, I will let the sky dry, laying flat. Sorry about my large head in the way. Now that the sky area is dried up, let's go in and finish painting the rest of the buildings. So I'm just applying kind of like a warm wash, comprising of mostly yellow ochre with a little bit of burnt sienna. All right, I would say that is going to plan, and we are finished with the step 1 and 2. For this painting, we know there is an element of these red accent, so that's kind of a added step, I would say, between the light wash and the mid-tone wash. So I'm right now adding all of the red accent and aiming to keep them fresh. I want the red objects in the front to have a bit of soft bleeded edge. I've used the spot wetting techniques to wet down some areas of the paper. So when I applied the same consistency of red color, they become much softer and doesn't catch as much attention as compared to a sharp edge. While the red area is still wet, I came in to add a bit of a darker red tone because I know I wouldn't come back and paint this red one more time. So then later on, whatever I add in this area will all have a much darker tone and also much sharper edge. Cool. Now that the red areas is dried up, let's carry out step 4 according to the painting plan. You see that I have also used a bit of spot wetting to certain areas of the basilica because there are areas of soft casted shadows by the objects at the front. And for the shadow underneath the umbrella, I used a bit of more of a thicker paint so that can become much darker. Now this large shape gets connected to the Doge's Palace building on the right, which then we can just go in and connect. Note that this Doge's Palace building, the top half of it has more of a warmer shadow. The bottom has a cooler shadow. I think the top has more of a pink marble. That's why it's showing off as warmer. So in the mid-tone wash itself, I try to distinct that by using a mixture with more burnt sienna on top, while mixing more of a ultramarine blue and a lavender color when I get to the bottom. There's also this niche and the statues that's white marble in the middle of the pink marble. That's why I switched over to the cool gray when I get to this area, and then I will switch back to the warm gray once I'm done with it. Now this technique might be a bit more advanced, but basically I'm using wet on wet technique to add a bit of more dimensionality to the shadows. I find that adding a bit of gouache while the wash is still wet can create these really cool brush marks that are more distinct, yet still blended nicely with the rest of the shape, so they don't stand out as much, but really have that additional texture for the buildings especially, and that feels quite effective. For the shadow of the pillar, because this is a rounded object, spot wetting is the way to go to wet down the area and then apply paint to on the left hand side of the area so that it has this gradation suggesting the rounded shape. The shadow of these steps are still considered as a mid-tone, although they are a bit lighter. That is because this is a white object as well. We're done with the large mid-tone shape on the right. Now let's address the objects on the left. So you see me spot wetting this front building. That is because I do want soft shadows of all of these ornate details carved on the building. I'm alternating between the ultramarine blue and yellow ochre to have kind of that two-tone shadow. According to the plan, we also have these bistro sets in the foreground that needs to have its own mid-tone value. So for that, I focused on having these kind of casted shadows Of course, you don't need to paint individual chairs and tables, and that's the beauty of using connected shapes, because it gives the impression of these distinct objects, but they look really cohesive and unison. When I was painting the pillar, I think I have forgotten to paint the casted shadow of the pillar itself, which should then get connected to the bistro sets in the background. Let's finish off the mid-tone wash by addressing the figures and just checking for any other areas that needs to get the same mid-tone wash. You see that I am jumping ahead with using some of the darker tones on the figures. It is a preference, certainly not a rule. I do find it helpful to add some dark tones on the figures while the mid-tone is still wet. That's mainly because figures have rounded shapes, and the softer edges and the wet on wet just works well in one go, as versus waiting for the shape to dry, where you will lose some of the rounded soft edges. Now we can move on to the dark tone. After I painted the archways with a dark tone, I feel, however, these shapes are a bit too jarring. Therefore, I went ahead and added some more dark tones for the architectural details, like these sculptures and the casted shadow of the ledge, in order to lower the contrast between the white walls of the front building and its dark archways. There are certain figures that has not been yet completed. That is because these figures are connected to the dark tone shapes, so I do want to address them as one unit. The windows will be primarily dry brush mark to give the impression of these carvings without having to depict them individually. The windows closer to the focal point in the center is a bit more defined, and towards the edge of the paper they become more of a dry brush mark. Everything has gone mostly according to plan, and for the very last step, which I didn't visualize in my plan diagram, it typically involves using a rigger or some kind of really thin brush to add small details using both the darkest dark and white gouache. This helps certain areas pop more, and of course you need to do it judiciously. Alright, I think we have a pretty nice painting here. Let's conclude the demo with a short critique. So overall, I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. The high contrast area of the umbrellas and the basilica in the background is pretty obvious. The shadow of the pillar is maybe the only thing that was amiss, which, as it was initially intended for it to connect to this bistro area in the background, but it did not. So it became this really odd shape that's a little bit hard to discern what that is. For the wash of the sky, somehow it didn't dry up as neatly. So maybe I should have not let the artboard lay flat while the sky dry, because that always have a risk of some of the paint towards the bottom of this area bleeding upwards and creates a bit of a blotchiness. Another thing that maybe caught too much attention and feels a little unfinished are these white space between the figures. So maybe for the archways, before I apply the dark tone, we should probably lay in a wash of the mid-tone. So it's not showing the color of the paper, but rather a much darker wash underneath. But hopefully this is a helpful example to see how you can break down a complex scene like such. And by having a very clear painting plan, it really allows you to have maximized control to execute towards the vision you had for your composition. All right, guys, looks like we are close to the end of the video, and I hope this is a useful explanation and tutorial for you guys. If you find my channels and videos helpful, I do appreciate you guys liking it and subscribing, And please always do let me know any feedback or questions you guys have under the comment section. All right, I hope to see you all next time. Bye!